Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Wilden, and it is my honor to be the Executive Director of OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Berkshire Community College. And I'm especially honored to be here today to introduce and welcome everyone to a free community class that OLLI is providing thanks to our extraordinary volunteer leader and instructor, Virginia O'Leary, to the Berkshire community and beyond. This class is called Resilience in the Face of COVID-19. It's being produced live on a webinar today with you all in attendance. And for those who are on the Zoom webinar, webinars are different from meetings or other classes because the students are not visible and also are not audible. That is because we have almost 200 people signed up for this class. So this is the best way to maintain the focus on the instructor. So if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment during Virginia O'Leary's presentation, you can do so using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And I encourage everybody who's attending via webinar right now to just go down, take your cursor and go to the bottom of your screen in most cases, click on it where it says chat, and just you can choose all panelists or all panelists and attendees and just say hello from your name and the town that you're in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that myself. And because what we found with using Zoom is that practice is the best way to learn. So please take a moment to practice using the chat, and that will allow you to write in questions or comments that Ginny will address during the class. I also want to let you know again that this course is being broadcast live on Pittsfield Community Television and will also be rebroadcast by them, I believe. So this will be able to reach more people, including people without internet access. And it's also being broadcast live on our Facebook page right now as well. So I see lots of people are writing into the chat. We have people from as far away as, well, Williamstown, but Sarasota, Florida, Stockbridge, Pittsfield, Lenox, Dalton, Great Barrington, North Egremont. Great. Northeastham. I do not know where Northeastham is. New Ashford, Lee. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce OLLI's board president, Barbara Lane, who's been an extraordinary leader, especially in these extraordinary past few months. As she says, this is the year of experimentation, because we are trying out new ways to bring our communities together, to share information, to come together and learn in these difficult times. So please join me in welcoming Barbara Lane.
Thank you, Megan, and hello, everyone. It's so interesting to see the towns flash by on my screen here. Now I'm seeing Albany, New York. Wonderful. Anyway, I'm Barbara Lane. I'm the president of the Berkshire OLLI board, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to and tell you a little bit about the lecturer for this course, Dr. Virginia O'Leary. Ginny really needs no introduction within the OLLI community, where she's a well-known lecturer, the chair of our social science curriculum committee, and an active member of our board of directors. Ginny is also a very active member in the community at large. In fact, she's a local gal who grew up in Pittsfield, left, and returned home in 2015. She's a member of the Freedom Dinner Committee of the Berkshire branch of the NAACP, a founding member of Intergenerational Connections, and the founder of Pittsfield Prospers, which is an initiative to change the narrative about the city of Pittsfield. If you recognize her face but can't quite place her, it may be that you're remembering the very nice person who helped you find a seat at either Barrington Stage or Jacob's Pillow, as Ginny's a volunteer usher for both organizations. A bit of Ginny's educational background and career. After first obtaining her doctorate in social psychology from Wayne State University, Ginny taught psychology for 43 years at a number of universities, the last being Auburn. For the first 20 years of her career, Ginny's research focused on gender roles and working women. In fact, her writings include a textbook entitled Toward Understanding Women, which was the second on the topic of the psychology of women to be published in the United States. In the early 1990s, her research focused on resilience and thriving, and her 1995 publication, co-authored with Jeanette R. Ikovitz, was a seminal contribution to what is now labeled positive psychology. In 2005, she was awarded a Fulbright Teaching Research Fellowship that took her to Kathmandu, Nepal. Ginny also held several staff positions at the American Psychological Association and is past president of its division of the Psychology of Women and past president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, Dr. Virginia O'Leary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can't tell you how delighted I am to be with you all today. It pleases me to my core to be able to share with you what I know of within the empirical or research-based literature in psychology, which I think can be of assistance to all of us here in Berkshire County and beyond in coping with COVID-19, as well as numerous other uncertainties that have suddenly appeared in our world. I think that probably the best way to, oh dear. There, okay, my computer froze. Technology, as we all know, is not always our friend. Just want to run down what you might expect today. We are, of course, going to talk about resilience, a little bit about what it is. We are then going to talk about the situation in which we find ourselves, one that is where we are all confronting fear, uncertainty, and anxiety. I'm going to talk a little about some of the consequences of facing that uncertainty, such as depression and other manifestations of psychological manifestations. But what I really want to provide is, as we move through the next 4 classes together, a focus on tools that will be of use, I hope, to you as we together apart figure out how to live in this brave new world. So we're going to talk a bit about focusing on what we can control as opposed to what we cannot control. And we're going to focus a bit on maintaining connections. Kind of midway through this class, we're going to do a very short meditation together from a distance. We're going to talk about the benefits of exercise. We're going to talk about the benefits of forest bathing. That would be taking a bath with your clothes on. Then we're going to switch and talk about well-being. And finally, two of the most useful tools in the empirically supported psychology toolbox for coping with uncertainty, fear, and anxiety: compassion and gratitude. And that will take us through the next approximately 80 minutes. And we will continue for the next 3 weeks doing a deeper dive into that psychology toolbox. Having said that, I want to make it very, very clear so that you all understand I am not a clinical or counseling psychologist. I am not licensed to provide direct psychological services. I'm a researcher, and I have, because of my interest, made a point of keeping up with the research literature in this broad field of resilience, which falls under the more general rubric of a spin-off from the subspecialty, my disciplinary subspecialty, which is social psychology. That spin-off that occurred about 20 years into my career is health psychology. So having said that, I will from time to time, I'm not a clinician, I can't provide services, but I will refer you periodically to some helpful websites or provide you with other kinds of resources should you find yourself someone you in your family or someone you know who needs assistance in these difficult times, because there is assistance out there, but sometimes it's hard to know where to find it. So let's turn just quickly to a definition of resilience. Resilience refers to the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It really means a kind of toughness. And the origin of the term is pretty interesting. It arose several hundred years ago in the context of things moving back to their original shape. A contemporary example of that would be a rubber band. A rubber band is resilient. When you stretch it and let go, it snaps back to its original shape. And resilience is the label that we give to anything, such as this lovely little flower, that in the face of difficulty has come back. That's what I hope all of us will do, even though we struggle. Barbara Lane referred to a paper that I wrote in 1995 with Jeanette Ikovics, where we provided a model for resilience and thriving. And in that paper, in the first or second paragraph, I don't quite recall, one of the things we said was that although we couldn't tell you what the challenge would be that you would face during your lifetime, we could guarantee you that there would be a challenge. And when we wrote that paper, we were thinking about individually based challenges. The challenge of a loss of a marriage, a loss of a spouse, loss of health, for example. But now it's 2020, and we are all facing the same challenge together, in addition to what other little little and not so little individual challenges we may be facing at a personal level. So this is, if you will, a universal challenge. And you've all seen it in some fashion or another depicted on the television screen or on your computer screen. And there it is, COVID-19. COVID-19 is contagious, as we all know, but so is fear. And a lot of us right now are feeling anxious, fearful, uncertain. And that's pretty rational, given where we are today, June 1st, 2020. From an evolutionary perspective, fear is necessary for us. It allows us to survive in the face of real and present danger. But in the face of uncertainty, such as the current COVID-19 epidemic, or pandemic more properly, and its potential outcome, it can also bias our decisions in ways that do not accurately reflect the dangers that are before us. That's a pretty good visual depiction of fear, I think. And as I just said, fear promotes survival. It allows us to have at hand, often, the necessary tools to survive in the face of some kind of natural disaster, for instance. And it's prudent if you live in the path of frequent typhoons or hurricanes. We've just entered the season, or earthquakes, to have the implements of survival from, if not predictable in terms of time and day, at least recognized possibilities that they will occur. In the introduction, Barbara Lane mentioned that I had a Fulbright in Kathmandu, Nepal. And as you may recall, several years ago, there was a major earthquake in Kathmandu. I wasn't there then, but when I was there in 2005, the city itself, a portion of the city actually where I was living and teaching, had an earthquake that measured, I believe, 6.2 on the Richter scale. Now, people knew that the big one that did so much destruction more recently was coming because of the nature of the tectonic plates that are under the Kathmandu Valley. And I like to think, although I'm kind of a high risk taker, I'm pretty prudent, I had a survival kit. I had a small shovel, I had rope, I had water, etc. So it's not a bad idea, of course, to be prepared. I want to switch for a moment to talk about what happens to us in terms of what happens to our bodies when we are fearful. Well, one of the things that happens is that we have a sudden rush of adrenaline, and it gives us the ability, once we've made the decision, the necessary decision about the nature of the threat, to either fight in order to survive or to flee in order to survive. And so here you see the red line, that's preparation to fight. We see here exiting in the wavy line. And then there is one other response. When you've absolutely flood with adrenaline, what happens is, whoops, excuse me, I pressed the wrong button. You freeze. And here we see, of course, the proverbial deer in the headlights. So this is what happens in the brain. I'm not going to take a deep dive into the brain. That's much too much for our purposes. But you can see at the side of the screen this stress hormone boost. It's cortisol, etc. It leads to a racing heartbeat. The little heart here is racing, which leads to fight, flight, or freeze. And as many of us know who have had this kind of fearful response in the face of a threat, digestion shuts down. That's so other things can rev up. But when you are fearful, you often are not very interested in eating. And here, in the center of the brain, pictured, is the amygdala, which is the brain, the portion of the brain that is activated when these stress hormones are released. One of the things that Barbara mentioned when she introduced me was that I had had my degree for a very long time. And she didn't say that to give you a clue about my age. At some point I may reveal it. But as I was sitting waiting for the class to begin, I actually did a little mental arithmetic and realized that I got that degree. I became a, quote, psychologist 51 years ago. That's a long time. By the way, I've been a very lucky human being. I've never regretted the choice of the profession that I chose. Probably because it's endlessly fascinating as we learn something new literally every single day. And I think it's important to point that out because, and the reason I brought up the long span of my career and following psychological research, I was explicitly taught in a classroom as a graduate student that the mind was here and the body was here, and essentially they were two totally independent systems. I cannot begin to tell you how wrong that was. Now, it wasn't that the faculty who taught me were interested in providing fake news. We simply didn't know what the connections were, how they functioned, etc. And that's why the field has been so vital and exciting, because we learn more about those connections with every new study that's properly conducted. And so here you see some of the consequences of stress, and fear, of course, is a stressor on the body. That would be headaches, health and difficulties. Your immune system is suppressed in the face of stress and anxiety, fatigue, etc. Emotionally, loss of confidence, irritability, depression, alienation. Over here, in terms of the mind, this is what psychologists refer to as the cognitive processing aspect of ourselves: worry, impaired judgment, indecision, negativity, and finally, the behavioral manifestations, things like suddenly accident prone, eating difficulties, drinking more, insomnia, restlessness, etc. The mind and the body, the emotions and behavior are all functioning within our single selves. And one thing that I feel it's important to underscore, and I'm just going to give you an example from a study, is that fear distorts our thinking, and we're not aware or don't realize that our thinking is distorted when we are fearful or anxious, because we're all absolutely sure we're very rational. And that's one of the reasons it's so important to check to make sure that we have accurate information when we are alarmed. The study that I referred to here was a study that was done by Jennifer Lerner during the aftermath of the tragedy of 9/11. And she found that people who were more fearful in the face of that tragedy were also more likely to believe that they were under threat and that threat was imminent. But they weren't aware that their anxiety was distorting their estimate of the threat possibility. But when she compared them to people who expressed measurable lower levels of anxiety, that's when she saw the difference. So it's particularly important that we do everything we can to make sure that we have accurate information about the source of the threat that we're feeling, and that source is a trusted one, trusted in terms of accuracy. Uncertainty itself can lead to distress, and we're certainly living in uncertain times because we don't know, in the face of this viral pandemic, when effective treatments will be discovered or when there will be the availability of a vaccine. Research on the impact of uncertainty goes back, empirical research anyway, goes back into the early 90s when Michel Dugas and his colleagues in Ontario proposed a model of intolerance and a way, intolerance of uncertainty, and a way to measure that uncertainty. Dugas had noticed, and he is and was an anxiety researcher, not an anxious researcher, I assume, but one who studies anxiety, that in general, and this is probably true of all of us, people prefer, if they have the choice, certainty over uncertainty. And there is a photograph of Michel Dugas, taken some years ago. The higher our levels of uncertainty, the more cognitively vulnerable we are, which simply translates the more vulnerable we are to distorted thinking. Now, it isn't always true that uncertainty is negative. Sometimes it has an upside. For example, we want to have a spoiler alert if we read a review of our favorite movie, so we can decide for ourselves whether or not we want the ending revealed. So it's not always a negative, but that's mostly true when the uncertainties are small. Generally, if we are uncertain, we do one of two things. We either try to clarify that uncertainty relative to others, how am I doing compared to other people, or we try to avoid the source of the uncertainty. And uncertainty makes us anxious. I can't help but share with you, I pulled this picture out and put it on the slide yesterday morning before I lost all the slides for this class about 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Talk about anxiety. I know exactly what this young woman is feeling in the face of her computer screen. When we're in an ambiguous situation, and there's no doubt that is where we are today, not knowing, as I said before, when we will be able to resume life as we used to know it safely. We look for cues about the nature of the threat so that we can understand it, so that we can make decisions about how to respond. So we look, we scan the environment, but we can't see the droplets that are currently threatening us. And that makes it difficult to detect the threat, although we know that we are in danger. And I'm just pointing out here again the amygdala area of the brain. So we're doing two things. We're trying to detect threat, and that leads us, I guess I should go back just to the activity in a different part of the brain. Once we've detected the threat, then it's the frontal lobes that are involved in emotional regulation, how we respond in the face of that threat. But as I said, this threat has left us all very uncertain. And there's a range of possible responses to the threat. It's a continuum. Some of us, for example, I include myself, I think, in this category, at least somewhere on the continuum, have listened carefully to the advice of health experts and engaged in hand washing. My hands are pretty dry. I bet yours are too. Of course, there's an excessive level of hand washing such that you wash your hands so often that not only do they chafe, but they may bleed. That's at the extreme end of the scale. And that's a symptom sometimes manifested in the face of people with obsessive compulsive disorders. At the other end of the continuum is avoidance or denial. Oh, it's not going to happen to me. I'm not worried about social distancing. I'm not concerned about wearing a mask. I'm not concerned about getting into a swimming pool with lots of other people, etc. And we've certainly seen human responses both around us here in the United States and around the world, distributed across that entire continuum. Uncertainty fuels fear. It makes us feel lost, confused, unclear, bewildered, etc. So let's now turn for a moment to one way that we can control that fear, or at least combat it. There it is. Our favorite device, the remote control. And it does give us control. We absolutely do need to be informed about this virus. But too much information, too often, especially if it's confusing or contradictory, can really be harmful because it increases our anxiety without giving us a clear answer about how to proceed. So one tool is to limit your news consumption. It is possible to do that. Turn off those screens turn off your social media platforms, turn off the radio, not so that you are totally avoidant and know nothing, but so that you're not inundated 24/7 with this very distressing information. And I want to underscore the importance of knowing about the accuracy of the source of the information. How many times did we all watch the Twin Towers crumble on 9/11? Over and over and over and over, because of our access to the media repeatedly showing those horrifying clips. And it was overwhelming, and it felt like that every tall building in the world was coming down, when in point of fact, things were bad enough, but it was, I'm not going to say only, it was 2 buildings, but the repetition made it feel like certainly hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of towers falling. When we get stuck in this kind of information overload, it can promote a downward spiral into depression. And that depression can be exacerbated if we are isolated. And of course, as we all know, right now, we are isolated. We may not be entirely alone, but on the other hand, as has been true for so many, we in fact may be the only ones, and we may be the only ones without reliable sources of connectivity, whether that's, there are good reasons that that connectivity may not be person to person, but it's also true that when I think of Berkshire County, I think of the hill towns where people don't have reliable internet connectivity or cell phone connectivity. So if they are alone, they are even more alone. And the consequences of this uncertainty can be quite profound. Domestic abuse, we know, is on the rise because COVID-19 has created a perfect storm. If someone is trying to control your behavior and you are isolated from others who might either assist you in escaping, or you yourself could leave but now can't, then things go from bad to worse. Right now, other concerns are obscuring clear data collection, but all of the experts working in the field of domestic abuse are confident. I hate to use that word because I see confidence usually as something positive, but confident that once we are on another side of this pandemic, we are going to see a lot of damage in terms of domestic abuse, domestic violence. And very distressingly, we know there's been a reduction in reporting from teachers and neighbors because of our isolation. So most of the reports are coming from law enforcement, and they're not reporting cases of domestic violence until they've escalated to the point of great danger. I said I would provide some tools. This is the National Domestic Abuse Hotline, through which people can get referrals. But when you are isolated with someone who is abusing you, you may have great difficulty in making that 800 phone call, and I am aware of that. But perhaps someone else can be signaled, etc., and call for you. We also know that substance abuse is on the rise. Liquor sales nationwide, probably worldwide, I haven't been following that, have increased. And just within the last week or so, the Berkshire County District Attorney, Andrea Harrington, warned that there were increasing levels of fentanyl being found in heroin here in the county, which of course is life-threatening. Here again, just another 800 number, open 24/7 to connect you to you or someone you know to the hotline at the Breen Center. Of course, suicide, we anticipate, will be on the uptick as a result of people feeling isolated, perhaps abusing substances, and feeling helpless and hopeless. There are big differences in demographics when we talk about suicide statistics. So for example, more women attempt suicide than men, but men who attempt suicide are significantly more likely to be successful. And the reason for that is that the methods that are preferred by women versus men are different. Men use guns and know how to use guns, whereas women are more likely to turn to pills, which increases the chance of their survival. And I mentioned the fact that, just go back to this for a moment, that there are differences among demographic groups. We know that suicide rates in the older population nationwide are increasing. And it's due to loneliness, and of course, isolation is a factor. And now, in light of the pandemic, even more of a factor. So here we have the 800 number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. I think this might be a good time to ask Megan if we have any questions at this point, and I will stop again.
We don't have any questions currently in the chat. Does anybody wants to add anything now? A question or a comment about what's been discussed, or your personal experiences of fear and resilience in these times? You can do it in the chat box at the bottom. We'll wait a second and see if anybody wants to add anything right now or ask a question. I don't see any questions right now. So.
All right, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure if you had something, you had an opportunity to ask. So what I've tried to do is just kind of lay out where we are in the face of COVID-19, but now we're going to turn our attention to where it will stay for the remainder of this 4-session course, quote unquote, and that is to tools for dealing with fear, anxiety, and uncertainty stemming from COVID-19. And by the way, these tools are useful tools for whatever kind of life disruption or threat one is facing. And certainly, we know that connection is helpful. Unfortunately, physical distancing has really interfered with our ability to reach out and touch someone. That's the City of Baltimore poster reminding people to distance themselves. It's interesting to me that we very quickly seem to have adopted on a national level the term social distancing, but I would argue that physical distancing is really the more appropriate label. Lots of us have been enormously creative in finding ways to remain connected even when physically distanced. And of course, we've used technology. As a long-time classroom teacher of undergrads in taking introductory social psychology, I used to talk at some point during every semester about the very long time frame it takes for significant social change to occur. And the conventional wisdom was that it takes about 7 decades for significant social change, whether you're talking about the right to vote or some other social shift that goes from being not endorsed to having a majority of the population endorse it. Well, have I ever learned in the last 3 months how wrong that is? I have watched people in my age demographic, that would be older, turn on a dime in terms of their comfort with various aspects of technology in a matter of weeks. Here we are on a Zoom platform, and around the 1st of April, when the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at BCC decided, because of the pandemic, we had to take our spring semester classes online, and the OLLI staff began training people with the help of technologically sophisticated volunteers to use Zoom. Approximately 50% of our membership were first-time users. And now we have many, many boomer Zoomers. And it's been amazing how quickly that has occurred. But a minute ago, I referred to my concern for people who have difficulty connecting technologically, even when they have the skills, because they don't have adequate connections here in Berkshire County, for example. There are other ways, and one of them is, of course, snail mail. It's still a good thing to reach out. And I see that I have a question because I can see the questions come up on my screen about whether I feel that human connection is gone in light of this pandemic. And Lee, who has asked the question, indicates that I believe it's her view, is that human connection, someone I don't know, it has to do with touch, even handshaking, and wonders how we can move forward without those connections. But I guess I would argue that these are matters of social learning. And I referred a little bit ago to the fact that I had spent time in Kathmandu, Nepal. I actually spent quite a lot of time in South Asia, not just the 6 months that I had the Fulbright there. And there, the social custom is to greet people, leave people, and show respect for people by slightly bowing and saying namaste, which literally means, translates, I honor the gods within you. And touching is not part of that, but it is socially understood to be the highest form of both respect and connection. So in the same way that we learn to use Zoom if we need to, I think we can learn to use different forms of connection that will over time acquire the same meaning. But certainly that will take a little time. I want to now take us to a slightly different place in terms of building tools. And I invite you to join me in a very brief meditation. And when I say very brief, I mean very brief. But we know from a research angle that meditation promotes both physical and mental health. And so I invite you to join me in a 2-minute meditation, but I'm going to give you a little preamble before I close my own eyes and talk about how we're going to breathe for the next 2 minutes. Because I spent so much time in Southeast Asia, I became quite intrigued with many of the social customs and beliefs of the peoples in those cultures broadly defined. And one of the things I became interested in was Vipassana meditation, which is the meditation that the Buddha discovered sitting under the Bodhi tree some 2,500 years ago. And I decided that I was going to learn how to meditate. And you've just heard me talk for about an hour, so you know I'm not shy about talking. I did it professionally, if you will. So I decided that I was going to take a 10-day course in Vipassana meditation that involved 10 days of silence in a retreat setting. And my friends and family guffawed in my face and said, well, we think it's fine you want to learn how to meditate, but there is no way you're going to be able to be silent for 10 days. Well, I'm pretty determined once I decide to do something, and I did do it. I'm not saying it wasn't hard, I'm just saying that I did it. It was hard, but with practice, it can be done. And what is involved in meditation is focusing, letting the future and the past go from our minds and focusing on the moment. And in Vipassana meditation, we don't need mantras or of various kinds, or bells or gongs, etc. Simply join me now, if you would, for a very short meditation where we will use our breath. Close your eyes, if you will, and then breathe. Close your mouth. I can't do close my mouth and speak to you simultaneously, but close your eyes and feel the breath as you exhale on your upper lip, just under your nostrils. And it takes some practice even to feel that. And if you're by yourself in front of your screen, or even if you're with somebody right now, it sometimes helps to breathe out strongly. So you kind of, that force helps you feel that little tingle from your breath. So, and we're just going to do this for, as I said, a very short period of time, but just pay attention to those breaths, the feeling of the breath, and let your mind go. And every time a thought comes into your mind, just flick it away. And if you've never done this before, the minute you flick the first one away, the second's going to pop up. Don't worry about that. Just keep expelling those thoughts. Breathe in, close your eyes, exhale. Breathe in, exhale. And just keep doing this until I ask you to open your eyes. Remembering to let those thoughts go as soon as they begin to form. All right, slowly open your eyes. For some of you, I'm sure that was the first time you've ever tried meditation. For others, you may be very used to meditating and do it for many hours. Full disclosure, when I took the 10-day course in Kathmandu, we sat in the meditation hall for 10 hours a day, not simultaneously. I mean, we had breaks where we could move around. And indeed, we did try to sit in the lotus position, which of course is with your hands on your knees and your legs folded. It was, 15 years ago that I did this? I don't know if I could sit in that way today, but you don't have to sit. You don't have to meditate in the lotus position for sure. If you find this intriguing as a possibility, I suggest that you keep it up for a while. There are many, many sources online of meditation practices, guided, ranging from a couple of minutes all the way to an hour or so, and they are available in app form in many platforms for free. Exercise is certainly another tool, and we know that exercise promotes both your physical and your mental health. And having said that, by the way, I forgot something I wanted to mention about meditation. The Dalai Lama, who is the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, who are almost exclusively, as I'm sure you know, Buddhist, is very, very interested in brain science. And because of that, a number of Western researchers have joined him in studying brain differences, comparing, and I'm just going to tell you quickly about one study, the brains of novice monks who are just starting out learning to meditate, and the brains of older monks who have meditated for very long stretches at a time, 8 hours, 6 hours a day for decades. And what they have found, and of course they've used technology to find this, is that you can see actually structural differences in the brains of experienced meditators compared to the brains of novice meditators. So the difference is not only psychological in terms of how you feel more calm, more centered, but that actually makes structural differences in the brain. And we know that physical exercise also has profound both emotional regulatory impact as well as cardiovascular impact. So exercise is something else. Again, their Planet Fitness has an app that offers you free exercises from home. There are many, many such sources available, even for those of us who used to go to the gym and simply can't anymore. Some of them done from chairs, if that is easier for you, others done flat on the floor or using a variety of different types of assistance. I love the idea of taking a forest bath. We know now from solid research findings that the sense that we get from being in the outdoors, in the environment, feeling as though we are a small part of something bigger than ourselves, a feeling often labeled as awe, is actually soothing and psychologically helpful. Again, it calms us, it centers us, and it doesn't have to be solitary, although of course the picture here of the woman walking in the bamboo forest is a solitary picture. It's June 1st. The weather has finally gotten pretty good here in the Berkshires. The leaves are out, tulips are up, azaleas are out, the forsythia is already gone. We have many trails. You can socially distance, take a walk, take a bath with your clothes on. I think you'll find it helpful. So now we're going to turn to talk about well-being. Psychologists call well-being, have a slightly different word for it, kind of because we're so fond of jargon. I guess we're a lot like attorneys in that regard. If we name it, it's more ours. That's not very nice. I believe in sharing. But subjective well-being, as psychologists define it, is what most of us think of as happiness. Not the kind of, la, 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 skipping through the fields of flowers happiness, but rather how people experience the quality of their lives. And we have a psychologist by the name of Ed Diener to thank for advancing this notion back in the early 80s of subjective well-being. He defined it in terms of frequent positive emotions or affect, infrequent negative emotion or affect, and cognitive aspects such as just a general sense of life satisfaction. So that's Diener's definition, and here he is, of subjective well-being. And one of the aspects that promotes, again, based on solid research, subjective well-being is the expression or practice of compassion. And there's something heartwarming about the clasp of the younger, the older hand in the younger hand. And I know somebody just asked about touch and the loss of touch. And that is certainly a loss. And I suspect, although we're not going to talk about it today, but rather probably next week, one of the issues that all of us are facing in light of this pandemic is loss. Obviously, for those who have physically lost loved ones to the virus, there's that loss. But there's also a great deal of loss associated with the ways we used to do things, the ways we used to greet people, etc. And those need to be recognized as losses and grieved as losses before we can let them go in a healthy way. But let's stay right now with this question of compassion. What is compassion? Well, compassion involves putting the interests of others before our own interests. It also involves an emotional feeling, that drives cooperation. It pushes us to share the burdens of others and to refrain from causing others harm. Compassion makes us willing to sacrifice for a common benefit. And my goodness, we have seen thousands upon thousands of examples of enormous compassion expressed by first responders in the face of this pandemic. Caretakers, not only risking their own health, but the health of their families to care for those in need. I don't know about you, but I have been deeply touched by the extraordinary creativity and compassion expressed by so many individuals who have gone not just above and beyond in terms of caretaking, but also pivoting whatever business they are in, restaurateurs providing food for those who don't have enough because they've suffered furloughs or job loss with no idea of whether or not those jobs will come back in the same form or will ever come back at all. And interestingly, research tells us that when people are urged to protect others, engage in some behavior to protect others, it's a better motivator for doing the right thing than when they're urged to do the right thing to protect themselves. Think about it. So the message is, yes, wear a mask to protect yourself, but wear a mask to protect those with whom you come into contact. I bet a lot of you heard, perhaps on Mother's Day, what I heard when I took the telephone call from my son who lives in Colorado, wishing me a happy Mother's Day, expressing his concern about my health, saying, I wish I could come and visit you, but I don't want to be the guy who brings his mother a life-threatening disease, so that's out of the question. And of course, it brought tears to my eyes, and the tears were mixed. There was a piece of me, of course, that felt sorry for me because who knows what else, see him again. And there was a piece of me who was deeply touched by his, very central concern for my well-being. So it turns out that when we appeal to the altruistic concerns of others, it's a more effective way to get others to do the right thing than when we appeal to the self-interest of others. In fact, there's reason to believe, again, based on research, that altruism is a piece of human nature. Okay, we're programmed. Doesn't mean we can't override it, by the way, but that we're programmed to be concerned about others. In one study by Berrigan, Brooks, and Meltzoff that was published just a couple of months ago, and not directly related to this pandemic at all, they found that kids, toddler-age kids, are willing to share food with a stranger who really wants it, or appears perhaps even to need it, even when it's theirs and they're hungry. That's pretty altruistic. And 18, 19 months is not a long time to have been inculcated with cultural norms and values about when to share, with whom to share, under what conditions to share, etc. Research also tells us that if you compare societies, those that are cooperative versus those that are competitive as central values. And of course, cultural anthropologists have helped us do a lot of that work. What you find are that cooperative societies are those that are more likely to thrive than competitive ones. Which is not to say that we have not seen, indeed, even in the last few months, examples of extraordinary cruelty. We have. But we've also seen heartwarming examples of extraordinary and creative compassion.
Jenny, we have a question from Mary Vaughn, and her question is, do you think the 5 stages of grief play into dealing with the new normal?
Yes, well, I thought that I had responded to that a couple of minutes ago. We will talk about grieving the things that we've lost, and probably in the next class, and we do have to let some things go, there's no question. I have a slightly different take on the 5 stages of grief than the way it was originally provided as a grieving model. I'm not sure that there's stages. There's a lot of empirical work that suggests that we don't move through them in a stage-like fashion. But yes, I certainly think we have to acknowledge, recognize, and let go of some of the things that we have become used to, fond of, and maybe a few things that we don't like that much that will go along with some of these others in the new world that we face.
And we have one more question from an anonymous student, and that is, what does it mean for a society to thrive? What does thriving mean for a society?
Society. Well, again, I'm trying, it's a huge question. I do want to talk about it, that my plan for the last of the 4 classes is to address some of the silver linings that I see potentially coming out of this extraordinary time, which involves so much loss. I certainly understand that, and I'm trying to share some tools for dealing with that loss. But societies can thrive, and to give you a very quick, I'm running out of time here, a very quick response to what it would mean for a society to thrive. It really means not just returning to where you were, but to using the threat, the decline, that we all respond to with the startle response. Something happens, you go down, and then the choices are well, one is you don't survive. I don't have my graph, but I will have it in the last class. Another is that you survive, but you never come back to where you were, which would, and then thriving really is the ability to marshal your individual and social resources to grow beyond where you were before the event occurred. And I think we can talk about that at the level of individuals, the level of groups, and indeed the level of communities, which doesn't mean it's easy. And I will come back to that. Thank you. All right,
And
very quick.
Brian Harrison had a follow-up question. Is socialism an example of a cooperative society?
There are many kinds of socialism. and I think that, Phil Dealey just finished up a course on utopias. And I mean, it's a model out there for sure. But it depends on how it's orchestrated. But the values certainly would lead you there. Thanks, Brian. So just a couple of quick visuals of the creative ways that people have learned to support one another in light of, I'll go back here, in light of the need to distance, at least from others in your household. The Spanish families applauding healthcare workers off their balconies, people coming together, volunteering to provide food for those in need, creative ways to come together to continue teaching, to continue connecting. Okay, we're now coming down to the finish line. I just want to talk for a moment about the second big tool that I would like to advance. Well, I guess it's the third big tool, because we had meditation, the expression of compassion, and now gratitude. Gratitude is thankfulness or gratefulness. It comes from the Latin that means pleasing or thankful. And it's a feeling of appreciation felt by or a similar positive response shown to the recipient of some kindness, some assistance. And again, research tells us that people who count their blessings, and that's a piece of gratitude, are actually measurably happier and less depressed than people who do not. So what I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to give you a little tiny homework assignment, is as another tool, you consider keeping a gratitude journal. And I couldn't resist showing you a bunch of alternatives. If you're a crafter, maybe you'd like to spend a little time, since a lot of us have it, we're not going out so much, decorating a personal gratitude journal. Or you can use a volume that you already have at home that has blank pages. You can buy these journals online under the label gratitude journal or blessing journal. And what we know from a research perspective is that spending even 5 minutes a day reflecting on what makes us grateful shifts our attention away from toxic emotions like resentment and anger and envy, and focuses our attention instead on positive aspects of our lives. 5 minutes is all it takes to begin keeping a gratitude journal. And so I'm going to give you that if you're willing. I don't have any way to enforce it, so it's just, of course, a suggestion. But I want to urge you to do 2 things in the next week. I want to urge you to go online and to take the Authentic Happiness Survey at www.authentichappiness.org. You'll find it online. It won't take you very long. It's out of Marty Seligman's lab at the University of Pennsylvania. We'll talk more about Marty Seligman and his work on optimism and happiness and flow as the class moves on. But if you would do this even today, and you can do it online and you'll actually get a score. Isn't technology wonderful? And you can, if you wish, agree, they will ask you to say yes or no, to anonymously go into their data bank because they're collecting data on the relative happiness of the people who take their survey, but anonymously, not by name or email address. So please take the happiness survey and then spend 5 minutes every morning or afternoon or evening, whenever it's best for you, writing down 5 things that occurred in the last 24 hours for which you are grateful. You have to be a little specific. You have to say, to give you an example, today is my standard poodle's 5th birthday. And it's not enough to say, I'm grateful for my dog. That won't quite do it. What you need to say is, I'm grateful for my dog because he's been such a good companion during this time when I have been unable to see and touch my friends, or because he's so often so funny. And right now he's very funny. And next week I'll show you a picture. I didn't download one for today. As standard poodles do, he has a big furry top knot, but he hasn't been groomed now in 2.5 months. And he bumped into the porch door the other day going out side, and I realized he couldn't see. So he is now sporting a dog man bun. And I'll show you a picture of that. And of course, that's made Kurt and me laugh every time we think about the poodle with the dog man bun. So that's the kind of specificity I'm referring to. Or if you want to be techie about your gratitude journal, you can go to the Greater Good Sciences Center at Berkeley, where if you put in the URL thanks for with the numeral 4.org, you can keep your gratitude journal online. How sophisticated is that? And here's 6 questions that you might reflect on as you move through the next week. The one that I just suggested, what am I grateful for today? Who am I checking on or connecting with today? What expectations of normal am I letting go of today? How am I getting outside today? How am I moving my body today? What beauty am I creating, cultivating, or inviting in today? I urge you to try this. The researcher in me always has to do an experiment. And I think it's something that over time, and when I say over time, over a week or two, you will actually find of real value. First time or two, it may not be, it's just like, oh yeah, well, okay, and so stay safe, be well. I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Recordings of this are posted on our Facebook page and will also be broadcast on PCTV. If you want a recording sent to you, send us an email to OLLI, OLLI, @berkshirecc.edu, and we'll be happy to, and we'll see you next week.